Welcome to CS50 Week 8 section on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And this week we're going to be diving into web development. I'm Kelly. I'm one of the preceptors here on campus at Harvard, and that's my email. And so today we're going to start out by first talking about HTTP. Does anyone remember what HTTP stands for? Feel free to write it in the chat. HTTP, though, is basically this way of us sending information from one place to another. It stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So a protocol that is the way that we on the internet have been sending and receiving these packets of data. And so we'll also dive into HTML, those building blocks of our website, CSS, which is what makes our websites look pretty, and then JavaScript, which adds some of that interactive functionality to our websites. First with HTTP, as we saw in lecture, when we are now running our programs with web development, we're going to be using this new command, http-server, which basically creates a server for us on our local devices where we can run the websites that we create. So first we'll dive into HTML. And so today we're going to be working off of this example here, scoreboard.html. And so I have it pulled up on here. We're just going to take a look through what this code is doing and specifically the HTML elements. So I have my HTTP server running as well. So you can see on the right here, this is what the website is my HTML file is currently rendering. On the left here is our actual code. So we can walk through it line by line. First we have doc type HTML. So that basically just creates our HTML document. And then we've also told the HTML document that we're going to be writing in English. And so that's not something you're going to actually see rendered on your website, but it is this important piece of, say, metadata that is helpful for a website to have. Then we have our head. And so the head also does not render itself on the website, but it includes important information here. So for example, this title, scoreboard, where can you see that on my website? It's not on the actual page, but that information is there. Yeah, at the top, exactly on the tab. So we've given our website this title, scoreboard, and so that is important information for us to declare. We also have this style tag, which is where we are writing our CSS. So when we declare our style tag, everything within that style tag is now not written in HTML, but CSS. And we'll come back to the CSS. Then we move on to some more HTML elements here. We have body, which does contain the stuff that will be rendered on the page. And as we can see here, we have a table. And so this table has this opening and closing element. And then we have TR, which if you can guess, stands for table row. And then TD for each of these columns. And so you can see we have 3 rows here, each with 2 columns with either some text or like a button, for example. Okay. We also have our script tag down here, which is where all our JavaScript lives, and we'll come back to this later as well. Cool. Any initial questions on this scoreboard HTML file? Okay, so we'll talk more about this conceptually. Yes, you can download that, and I can send the link in the chat afterwards. Okay. So this HTML document is basically structured visually a bit like this. We have our document right at the top, and that's encapsulating everything that goes on in our HTML. And same with the HTML tag. And then within the HTML tag, we've divided it up into our head and our body. And this encapsulates, the head encapsulates things like title and style, and body encapsulates the things that are going to be on our page. So for example, right now we just have table and script tag. If we look more into our table, we can see it structured a bit like this. So it's very hierarchical, and we have table as the big tag that everything lives within, and then 3 table rows within each table TD, and then within the TD is some piece of content. You can see as well with the button, we have a button tag within which we have some text +1. And so everything in HTML sort of has this hierarchical structure where something lives within something else, which lives inside of something else. So now we can play around a bit with our scoreboard.html file and experiment by adding some elements. So this will be pretty open-ended. So if you have any ideas in the chat what you want to add to our site here, let's add some more elements together. So perhaps first I might start a header. I might give this page a title. So welcome to the scoreboard. And if I refresh over here, we can see that's rendered as an H1. H1 stands for heading 1. And you also have other headings, such as H2, H3. And as you can imagine, each of these go slightly smaller in size. So just to demonstrate, we can see we have these 3 headings now, each get slightly smaller. Okay, someone's suggesting to center this title, and that's a great idea. However, that's not something we can do actually in HTML. That is a CSS thing. And so if we focus right now on the HTML, what are some other elements we might want to add to this page? We can add whatever we want. Some of the other tags we have here are P, main, header, UL, LLI. So maybe P, for example, is our paragraph tag. Yeah, and we can add some text maybe. So this week, team 1 faces off against team 2. So now we can see that text render on the side here. We also have some elements like main, which don't really render anything itself, but are another way of sort of grouping together elements. And same with header. And as you know, usually websites have a header and a footer. Those are also tags that you can include. So maybe at the bottom under this table here, I want to include a footer. I could say made in CS50 section 8. Yeah. So we can see that at the end. It doesn't look super pretty right now, but that is not the job of HTML. And we can make it look pretty very soon. Some other elements we can demonstrate are UL, which we saw, which stands for unordered list. And so if I just have a UL element, you'll see nothing really shows up here. Even if I add some text here, you can see it, but there's no real list going on here. And so we actually use the li element, list item, to include a list. So maybe I'm going to write a list of my team1 players. And then I make sure I have my closing tag. So maybe John is on my team here, Charlie, and Alice. So now if I refresh my page here, we can see that this has created an unordered list, which just means bullet points. If I change this to OL, which stands for ordered list, then we'll see it changes to a 1, 2, 3. And so those are just some basic HTML elements, but there are a lot more out there which you can go explore for yourself. And these just give us the content that is going to be on our page. Okay, any other questions about HTML and the scoreboard? What about the space between the H3 and the OL? Yeah, great question. So we can see there's some like space between here. And so there is some default styling going on here in HTML. So when I just create a heading 1 and when I create a paragraph, it by default gives it some size, and boldness we can see here. And so those are really just the default stylings. We didn't apply any of our own CSS elements, but we can if we want to change these. And so if I wanted to change the space between the H3 and the OL, the list, I can definitely do that in CSS. But these are just the default settings. Okay, awesome. Okay, so with that, let's move to CSS, so making this scoreboard look a little bit nicer. So in CSS, basically the language will be written using these sorts of selectors and properties. You have a selector which tells you which thing you want your property to apply to. And so that could be a table description, so like one of these elements here. And so when you describe TD, for example, then the selectors within that will apply to every single TD. As well, if I chose H1 or P, then this would apply to every H1 element or every P element on my website. So this would apply to all of the TD elements. If I wanted to get a little bit more specific and only say apply some sort of styling to one thing, I could use what's called an ID. So we have this pound sign, the hashtag, which indicates that we're using an ID here. And then score1 is just the name of the ID. So perhaps we can see that TD in the second row here, so here where it shows us the score, we've given it an ID of score1. So this is now, this 0 here is being applied this ID of score1. And then the other 0 under team 2 is being applied this ID of score2. And so it creates this way of us individually being able to apply styling to just one element of a certain type without applying it to all of them. You also have classes, which are functionally pretty similar. The difference here we can see syntactically is that we have a dot instead of a hashtag. So dot team means that we have a class called team. And the big difference between an ID and a class is that classes are used when you have multiple elements, whereas IDs are typically only if you're going to be using that thing once. So you can see here we don't use score1 anywhere else. We don't use score2 anywhere else, which is why it's good here that we're using an ID rather than a class. If I wanted to, say, apply some styling to only the score variables, so I wanted it to apply to both of these TDs, then I could create a class that is the same for both of these. Okay. So for example here, if I wanted to apply something to team, then I could give this class team to each of these TD elements, and then it would apply the same styling to both of those. Okay, pause there. Any questions on IDs and classes and CSS? So we could actually go ahead and implement this class here. Team, and class is team. And so yes, IDs are typically used for a single element, whereas classes are used for multiple elements. So IDs are probably the most granular, like applying to one element, classes to multiple, and then you can apply to these elements themselves, like TR, TD, body, but that is going to be applied to everything of that type, which is not always what you want, but sometimes it might be. So now if we actually move to our style here, we can play around with some of the styling on this site. So put in the chat whatever you want to be changed about this current site's styling, and we can make that happen. Okay, someone says color. Yeah, that's a great one. So we can do a few things with color. We can change the color of the text. We could change the color of the background. So maybe let's try out some background right now. So I'm going to apply this to my body tag, which, as we know, encapsulates everything within this site that's being rendered, at least. And so I can use the selector background color, and I can set that to some color. And so you can use hexadecimal notation to represent a color here, but CSS also has some built-in colors. So maybe I just want to do blue. Okay, so let's refresh and see what happens. Okay, now it's blue. It's not very pretty, it's not very readable, but maybe if I do a light blue. Okay, light blue does not exist. So some colors exist, some colors don't. I could change it to yellow, and it just has this default yellow, or maybe coral. Oops. And it's got this orange. So maybe for now I'll just leave it as white, so that's easier to read here. But that's great. Someone asks how to add a picture in the background. Yeah, that's a great question. And so I believe you would have to have, that would be a mix of HTML and CSS, where you're importing this image using HTML, but then styling it in a way that it is the background of your website. Okay, let's see, what else can we do here? So maybe I want to change the color of the text. That could be one thing. So my big title here, I could apply a few things here. Someone mentioned centering earlier, so I could do text align. And maybe I'll make that centered. And I could also change the color to perhaps red. Let's see how that works. So now we can see it's centered and it's also red. Ah, someone says light blue without a space exists. Aha, very nice. Do you use CSS to determine if an image tiles or not? Yes, so that would be one of the things that you would write in CSS, where if you're applying a certain styling, usually selectors will also have certain keywords that you can apply that mean certain things. So tiling would be one of those. Yeah, great question. Okay, let's see, what else do we want to do here in CSS, if anything? Some other things we had color, we had background color, text align, we did those things. Spacing, I think someone mentioned. So perhaps if I wanted to, say, increase the space between the table and the other elements, I could add maybe padding on the top. And so with this padding, you could usually use different measurements. And so we can see here that the border was using pixels. So I could also do, like, say 5 pixels. Okay, maybe 5 is too small. Do 100 pixels. Okay, maybe I did that wrong. You can also use different measurements, which are relative to the, okay. Okay, maybe I have to do margin, actually. Yes, I think that's right. Padding is on the inside of the table, whereas margin is on the top. Yes, okay. So I can have a margin to add space on the top and bottom. And so this EM that I'm typing here is this sort of relative measurement, which calculates based on the size of your screen, how much you want something to be big or small, basically. If we see here, and I do inspect element, you can actually see these elements, this padding happening. And so, for example, here with the H1, you can see this, like, these orange bars, which are that default margin on the H1. Same with the paragraph tag, and now we can see with this table, I've increased this margin on the bottom and the top. And so now it's got this big white space. And then same with this H3, you can see that it has that default margin. So if we wanted to, say, get rid of that space between the H3 and the list, let's try, maybe I take H3 and I say the margin of the bottom, I actually want to be 0 pixels. Let's see if that works. Okay, sometimes things I think are, I see. Okay, yeah, so it did get rid of that margin, but now the ordered list also has a margin at the top here. So you can sort of play around with this inspect element tool to just see what's going on in your code a little bit more, and especially visually on a website. But those are some things that we can do in CSS. Any questions about CSS? Yeah, someone asked about fonts. So I believe with fonts, there are some that are built in to CSS, but you can also import fonts, say from Google Fonts or any other site. They can usually include these import tags that go in the head of your site. And then once you import that font, you're able to use it within your site. Let's see if I remember any off the top of my head. Maybe Arial? Some of these are built in, some of them are not, and I'm not sure if I remember all of them, but okay. Okay, maybe not font. But this is all things you can very easily Google, and most people do not remember all of these things off the top of my head, like myself. But yeah, basically all of CSS applies these same principles of having some sort of selector and then some properties with their respective values. Yeah, maybe Comic Sans. I'm not sure if I'm writing this. If someone could check for me. How do we apply fonts to? I don't believe Comic Sans is written like this, but yes. Okay. All right. Well, I can also show a website here. W3 Schools has some great reference material for all of these things. So I see font family was what I was looking for. So if I wanted to say use Arial, let's see if that works now. Okay, so that has now changed it. So font family is the name of the property. And so you can change those as well, and you can change the font size. But yeah, these online references are pretty great for getting a good sense of what actually exists as CSS properties, and as well as like HTML elements, as most of us starting out will not know all of them off the top of our head. Great. Okay, so with that, let's move on to our last piece, which is JavaScript. So in JavaScript, we're basically adding some interactivity to our website. And as you recall from lecture, some of that syntax is pretty reminiscent of what we've seen in C. And so even though it's a new language, the building blocks are still basically the same. So in JavaScript, when we're trying to get at a certain element within our document, we have this sort of cryptic notation here, document.querySelector, and then #add1. So what's going on here is that we're going to the document, and then we're selecting for this query that was given to us, add1. And so we go into our document until we find that add1 ID that's applied to one of our buttons here. And so then, once you have that element identified, you can also apply these functions like onClick. So specifying that when this element is clicked, I want something to happen. You can also use .innerHTML, which will basically change the HTML that's within that element if you wanted to, say, dynamically update a piece of HTML. So for example here, if I wanted to update the score, so we can see actually here, if I increment my score, these elements are changing. So even though on this table row, I can see that this says 0 in it, my JavaScript is written in a way such that when I press this 1 button, this HTML within this TD element here is actually changing its value, which is pretty cool. Okay, any questions about using this inner HTML or onClick function? Okay, so let's walk through some of these, our script tag down here. So this is what is giving us this functionality of us being able to press these buttons and increment the score. If I refresh it, it goes back to 0. And so what's going on line by line here is that we have two variables, and the way that they're declared in JavaScript is using this let keyword. So we're letting team1 equals 0 and letting team2 equals 0. And so this is just creating us two variables that are both, say, integers, and we don't have to tell JavaScript either what this type is. And then within this, we have this sort of long thing going on here. But basically what we just saw was we have the document as a whole, and then we're searching within that document for this ID, add1. And then once we've identified that element, which in this case is our button right here, this add1 button here, then we're applying this .onClick. So we're saying when it's clicked, then we want this function to run. And so within this is the function that's running every time that button is clicked. And so we can see that we've incremented team1 by 1. So add1 to team1 score. And then using the same notation, we're looking for the score1 ID. And then using that to get at its inner HTML, so the HTML that's written within that score1 element. And then we're setting it equal to this new team1 score. So rather than seeing 0, we're seeing the updated value after I click the button. And then the exact same thing for team2, except now rather than add1, we're using add2 to get at this specific ID for this button. And then we're obviously also incrementing the team2 counter rather, and updating the score2 element here, which is that 3. Okay. Any questions about this? So someone's asking why we have to pass an event in the. I see. So yeah, this is really just new syntax in JavaScript. That's just sort of how you declare a function's behavior, especially if you want to encapsulate a couple of things going on within a function. This is the syntax to do so. And same with inner HTML. That is also just a feature of JavaScript that is written the way that it is. So, okay. All right, so now let's say I want to add some more interactivity to my website here. One thing I could try doing maybe is, well, right now when I increment this all the way to like 20, it doesn't ever stop. And normally, you know, some games have some sort of limit to our points. So maybe I want to say that when the first team that reaches 10 points, we should just stop counting and say, here's an alert, and they've won the game. So this will be the last piece that we add to our document here. So let's see. Within our JavaScript, this function is basically running every time we press the +1 button. And so when we do that, right now it's just updating the score and then updating the HTML to render that score. But I can also maybe add some logic here that checks my team's score after I've updated it. And so maybe after I've updated it, if that team's score is, say, 10 points and they've won the game, then we can give an alert. Oops. And alert is also just another JavaScript function that's built in, and it passes in the text that you want to be the alert. So I'll say maybe team 1 has won. Okay, and let's now see if that works here. So I'm gonna refresh my page here. My scores are back at 0. So if I increment this to 10, then we can see I've gotten this alert here that says team 1 has won. Okay, how about for team 2? Right now I haven't implemented it, so I can keep incrementing that score past 10. But I could do a very similar thing here, where after I update team 2, I could say if team 2 scores 10, then team 2 has won. Yes, and someone has noted these 3 equal signs, and that is also another feature of JavaScript that's like slightly different syntax, but equality will be checked using 3 equal signs for, strict equality. Okay, so now if I refresh again, let's test this out. If I get team 2 score up to 10, then we see team 2 has won. Hey, awesome. All right. And so there are a lot of different things that you can do with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Like the combination of these 3 things make for a very powerful tool to create some pretty cool websites. But yeah, what happens if you use 2 or 1 equal sign? Well, we could try that. If I say change these both to 2 equal signs, let's see what happens. Okay, so it still happens. If I get this to 10, then, and then what about 1 equal sign? I think this might run into the same issue that we have in C, where we have this assigning happening. And so when I just use one equal sign, we can see it's kind of weird. I just pressed the +1 button, and then I immediately got this alert, since this is now assignment. And so it seems the 2 equal sign, 3 equal sign both give us the same behavior, but there is that slight difference in JavaScript's abilities. Okay. All right, well, if there are no other questions here, then yeah, that is the end of week 8 section on HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It was a pretty short one. But yeah, we'll see you here next week while we wrap up for week 9 on Flask.